So we are beginning everybody. And there are obviously various regional differences. I myself talk about the legacy of communism and the kind of lingering allergy of average people to certain terms, such as socialism or ideology. This meeting actually, in many ways, challenges the division between the old and new democracies, and other divisions between old, also lingering social sciences between old and new nations. So, I'd like to start with Dagmar, as I said, and Dagmar, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm starting the timer. I will try to be brief. I mean, one advantage and disadvantage both of being at the end is that most of my brilliant ideas have actually been said. So in a way, it's also a summary of some of the things we were discussing already at length for 2 days. Anyway, as you said, it's going to be about Slovakia and the whole world at the same time, in a way. We have already established, I think, quite well that Slovakia, despite the last year's election, which seemed promising, both the presidential election and elections into the European Parliament, which were showing possibly hopeful trends towards resurrection of liberal democracy. Surprise, surprise, a year later, actually not surprise to many of us, but a year later, it's quite visible that the kind of the trend towards consolidation of neoconservatism is continuing, and with full force. So essentially, I mean, that's one of the main points to make, to distinguish between kind of a dogmatic democratic fiction and democratic fiction that's on a hypothetical level. That's the idea of democracy as if. You know, we don't live in a perfect world. We will never be able to live in a perfectly just society. But there is a spectrum. You know, there's a spectrum. On the one end, it can be a system that works with hypotheses, that is searching, that's open to questioning, open to dialogue, that works on trial and a confession of error and correction of error system, etc. But then there is also a dogmatic version which seeks to fill in gaps and inconsistencies with dogmatic answers, with coercion, and essentially exclusion, ridicule, etc., etc. And we are moving towards the latter model. There's a parallel with the normalization society, which I'm not going to go into. The main point, I think, is that it involves a great deal of conformity on the side of the people to agree to this game, to this kind of a consensus on the dogma. I have 4 kind of main problems related to democracy and 4 main civic answers. I'm going to try to go through them in 2 minutes. The first one, which was already well established, is the very long-lasting trend of this neoconservative exclusivist regime of citizenship, not only in Slovakia, all over Central Europe. We could go back more than 100 years and hearken unto Bibo or Kundera, this sense of victimhood and always being on the wrong side of history, sensing danger and threat everywhere. This, despite all of the trends in Slovakia, this is very strong, and it's actually the Corona crisis and the new government are actually accentuating this trend. It also is linked to lack of tolerance, which is crucial in Slovak society. I think it was Martin Šimečka who said that our history is history of indifference towards otherness and towards others. And it's linked to this regime of citizenship, essentially, to this exclusion that we live. Linked to that is the populist trend towards a fake social agenda, essentially blackmailing the vulnerable and buying out people through social packages, works on this concept of exclusion and entitlement. People feel entitled to their social benefits, and it actually makes compassion and empathy and tolerance towards otherness even more difficult. The third problem already mentioned, and I can see I'm doing very poorly on time, is the hijacking of human rights agenda, which is really urgent in Slovakia right now. I mean, as Michal mentioned yesterday, after kind of a corona hiatus, this agenda has come back with a vengeance. In the parliament just a few days ago, the annual report of our public defender of human rights was rejected. And the discussion around that just unveiled in full force the extreme poverty of human rights discourse and understanding of democracy in Slovakia. And parliament is not an anomaly, it's a representation of where we are at, essentially. And the last, I don't know if that's a problem, I think it's just, I don't know what it is, I call it the ritual of rebellion. Essentially, the last government has ascended to power on the wave of anti-corruption and restoring the rule of law claim, but essentially it is more of a ritual of rebellion, which Max Gluckman describes in anthropological literature, which is essentially gives the theatrical opportunity for people to protest, to voice dissent, but it serves also as a catharsis, and it essentially serves to cement the status quo in place rather than lead to something new, something more constructive. Anyway, what are the answers in this situation? What are the possibilities for resistance? Unfortunately, in the, yeah, I know.
Yeah. Finish the last sentence you have. You have a last sentence. It could be long. Go ahead.
All right, here's my long sentence. So in a situation where our education system has failed and democracy is grossly not understood by the people, including the human rights discourse, the kind of free spaces for action are limited by this. I mean, it's too late to educate people and political leaders at this point. But we have some muscle memory, we have some memory of resistance, both individual and personal level. I mean, we have to become activist academics again, and we're doing that. It's happening, and the last few days have been really remarkable in the upsurge of social mobilization. We have the muscle memory of civil society. Luckily, it's so underfunded by the government that it's at least a bit more independent in this sense, yay. And the last point I want to say, Pavel has already, yeah, it's part of the same sentence, and it's really the last point. Pavel Knut has already mentioned it. I find it extremely important. Liberal Democrats are failing in working with emotions. The time of the Corona crisis is an opportunity to develop the kind of a mourning discourse, a social trauma discourse that uses to connect across spaces. That's our job. Again, we all write, we all teach, and also, also already been mentioned, to extend this empathy globally, because the consequences of Corona will hit hardest the Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, and we are already celebrating victory. And this will again not be our problem.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we all agree with you that that liberal democracy has to work out on finding again, or finding in itself again, a way of dealing of launching solidarity and all those emotions that you are talking about, which they don't know how to deal with. So I'd like to move to Jeff Isaac. He is going to be short. So I'm not going to use my watch here. We'll see. The piece that you read was written 2 months ago. I'm just the message is simple. We must urgently work to guarantee free and democratic, fair and democratic elections. I personally don't think one can add much to it, but obviously he can. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, I'm going to give a short overview of my paper. The vulnerability of the November election is the most serious threat to the future of democracy in the US and therefore in the world, perhaps. The combination of the plague of the coronavirus and the plague of Trumpism presents special dangers. A free and fair election is necessary in order to protect the democratic processes, flawed though they may be. These processes are essential as means for solving public problems, such as the pandemic and accompanying economic crisis, and they are essential as valuable in themselves as conditions of freedom. And at the same time, the pandemic renders these processes precarious. The threat to elections is not unique to the US, but in my paper and in my efforts more generally, I'm focused on the situation in the US. And I regard the US as a flawed liberal democracy at risk, where elections still can matter in a way that they cannot in China, Russia, Turkey, and perhaps even Hungary. So the regime type question is one we should be thinking about. We're not yet a dictatorship, yet. Electoral integrity in the US faces three serious challenges, and I talk about them in my paper. The first has to do with measures that must be put in place to secure a range of voting options that includes by mail balloting as well as safe in-person options. I draw heavily on the work of the Brennan Center, though a wide range of NGOs and civic groups, think tanks, and election law experts have proposed similar measures to secure the election. Because the US lacks a strong national electoral system, and each of the 50 states has its own rules and procedures, there is extraordinary variation in the administration of elections. A feature of the distinctive system of US federalism, which was rooted in a distinctive history of slavery and racial domination, the range of electoral practices across the country is the source of many exclusions and dysfunctions. At the same time, at this moment, the decentralized feature of the electoral process in the US can also be seen as a blessing for liberal democracy, because while Trump and the Republicans who control the Senate are adamantly opposed to strong federal legislation, many states and localities already have systems of mail voting in place and are doing what they can to prepare these systems in November. And particularly a number of the swing states have by mail voting option and are working to secure by mail voting option. I won't go on about that, except to say that the states are now totally financially strapped by the pandemic and have very limited financial resources and are not allowed to borrow, which is why almost every governor is appealing for federal aid and it's not forthcoming. But it's going to be a real challenge for every single state to run the elections in November, given the unique problems that elections will face and their lack of money. The second real challenge has to do with by mail voting and the postal system. By mail voting works if the mail system works. And there's currently an effort on the part of Trump and the Republicans to defund the United States Postal Service. I won't go into that. The third challenge before us is a broader challenge of, let's say, ideological communication. Trump threatens and poisons the public sphere, demonizing independent news media as fake news, using the White House press office, Fox News, and his own Twitter account to disseminate disinformation and paranoid conspiracy theories and false information about medical issues on a daily basis, signaling approval to far-right vigilante groups and planting the seeds of dissension and even armed resistance in the event that he might lose the election. When we met at the New School in October of last year, I spoke about this scenario, and I posed a question about whether Trump would leave office. Actually, I'm very proud that Adam Michnik published that piece in Gazeta in December. So Richard Hasen, an electoral expert, has focused on this with an article that has the title, "What Happens in November If One Side Doesn't Accept the Electoral Results? How the Coronavirus Could Contribute to a 2020 Electoral Meltdown." And so basically, the problem is that in terms of electoral practices, in terms of the functioning of the postal system, and in terms of the creation of a hostile environment, the election is in jeopardy. And I think the challenge is mainly ideological. Can we work with all of those concerned about the future of democracy in the US to issue appropriate warnings, to defend the integrity of the election, and to vigorously defend the value of free and fair democratic elections themselves? Or will the US go the way of Orban's Hungary or Erdogan's Turkey? And then I close by saying, while the election must be secured, it also must be won. A free and fair election is thus necessary but not sufficient. But without a free and fair election in November, Trump will have another 4 years, and we can be confident that he will use those 4 years to cement the power of his party and his family, to poison public discourse, and leave constitutional democracy in shambles and perhaps even beyond repair.
Thank you. We will move promptly to Samuel Marec, who is actually going to pick up where you left more or less, is going to talk about political communication, Trumpization of political communication during pandemic. Yes.
Yeah, and what I'm focusing on is our prime minister. Like my friends from Slovakia said, the curious thing is we had our elections into the parliament right before the corona outbreak. And after 2 months, you would probably say, well, I don't know what the government's going to do. I don't know what they're going to be like. But just like they said, we do know that we are probably standing at the very beginning of a conservative revolution. But I mean, I didn't focus on that. Instead, I chose the topic of how our prime minister communicates on social networks. In my article, in my paper, I also gave an overview of what happened in Slovakia in the last 14 years, because I thought it might be valuable for those of you who didn't know. And I'm a journalist. It's a good paper. I mean, it's fun to read. So you should do it if you haven't. So yeah, I focused on his communication, and I was actually surprised to find out that there's a certain president of the United States that communicates very much like him. So I focused on the likenesses. For example, our prime minister uses Facebook to say whatever he thinks, or he thinks, or he thinks people should know. After 2 months, he still doesn't have a spokesperson, and journalists are always, I mean, left to just guess what he meant when he wrote something. I mean, he posts up to, I don't know, 7 or 8 status updates per day. And some senior members of the government are actually complaining that, you know, we are having this incredibly important meeting, and he's on his phone all the time reading comments and responding to comments on Facebook. So that's kind of like a you know, like a parallel structure compared to media, because he just says what he wants. He never faces any opposition there. He also uses very specific language, which is very informal. That's what his image is. You know, I'm informal. I don't talk the way normal politicians do. I'm very informal, but the language is also very aggressive and offensive at times. Yesterday he posted a rather sexist joke. So basically there are no limits. There are no limits to that, and he even uses Facebook to attack anyone who's against him. Also using profane language, even his coalition partners. And what he also does is, I mean, he doesn't necessarily focus on saying the truth, which is to say that he lies rather often. But what he does, that's a very good example, because our healthcare system is not great, so we had to, you know, specify departments where we're going to treat coronavirus. So some treatments, surgeries had to be postponed. And I mean, everybody knew that, and we knew, okay, yeah, that's the only way how we can manage. But then people started complaining, like surgeries are not getting done on time. What about people who suffer from cancer, and so on and so forth? And he just flat out denied it. And he said, well, nothing like that is happening. We're not postponing any surgeries. And that's a flat out lie. But what he actually does on Facebook, and there he's got like 150,000 followers, which in a country of 5.5 million is a lot. And what he does there is he's building an alternative reality for his fans and for his voters. And they are actually they don't rely anymore on what they see happening, what's happening in reality, in real life outside. Instead, they believe what he's writing. So the conclusion is that although I didn't really focus on finding similarities with Donald Trump, in the end I did. And the funny thing is, the reason that Mr. Matovic won the elections was because he was there to fight corruption. And we wanted somebody who would not be corrupted, who would be honest, and who would like build new political culture. And at the end, we might have just gotten our version of Donald Trump, really. Yeah, that's about it.
Thank you very much. Somebody yesterday, I think it was yesterday, mentioned the folksy dimension of autocratic or of autocrats, and I think that's something that's a kind of a similarity that you pointed out too. between
Yeah.
your people and ours. Jeff is going to talk about the expressive dimension of politics. So in a way, as much as it might be a stretch, I think it is connected. And referring to Goffman.
It's
so.
not even a stretch.
Okay, go ahead.
So first of all, I agree with Samuel, Jeff, and Dagmar almost completely, with little variations on themes. I find their presentations, their papers and their presentations now highly informative, and I feel that they speak to me. What Samuel has to say, I think, is something striking. There's a new type of there's a new type of autocracy that has, there are actually important differences between the autocrats. So for example, Orban is actually a highly effective politician and able in some significant ways to get his project done. Whereas Trump is a very expressive, successful expressor of resentment and of fear and envy, but actually, and it all serves his ego. But actually, what his politics are, what his political end is not at all clear. With Jeff, I quake as he does about the possibilities of a free and fair election in November. That's the problem of the first order. But then the problem of the second order, as he put it, is actually we have to win because the fate of democracy, actually in American democracy, lies in the balance. And the whole idea of politics, civil society, democracy as if is very, very real to me, especially not only in the negative sense, which Dagmar emphasizes, but also in the positive sense, which he recognizes but doesn't emphasize. And that is, if we act as if we live in a democratic society, then we will act democratically and in the process constitute democracy. That's the possibility. And I'm very, very interested in this possibility as we kind of assume and work for a free election to struggle against Trump and the Trumpists around the world. Now, my major concern is that the opposition to the autocrat in the United States, but also in all the countries that we're concerned with here and many other countries, the opposition is not capable of acting in concert. Too many secondary issues divide us. In a comment in the last session, I said, I worry about this term neoliberalism. I worry about the term neoliberalism because when it's used as a description of a negative description, which proves that the potential coalition partners of progressives are actually drawing a line in the sand. And by drawing that line in the sand, the autocrat may prevail. Okay, so I'm very, very concerned about the creation of coalition. On the expressive dimension of politics, I think this all the issues on our agenda have substance. We want social justice. We want, in fact, a democratic polity. We want gender justice. We want academic freedom. We want human rights. All these are substantial, important ends. but how we articulate ourselves in reaching those ends is actually a question. So for me, actually, the way we articulate our politics is an important part of our politics. So an important part of Trump and the Trumpists is the way they denigrate people with expertise, the way, you know, their tone, their derision, their dismissal, their aggression is, all those things are about something, but actually the means of expression are empowering and actually part of their attraction. And so what I'm very, very concerned with is that those who oppose this form of expression and the political ends that it's applied to actually develop ways of expressing themselves so they can actually work together. So in the United States, there's the issue of the relationship between the pragmatic wing and the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and both of these wings of the party and their relationship to Republicans of goodwill, of Democratic will, the so-called never Trumpers, and the independents. And the way we express our positions actually are an important way of forging the coalition. It's not just about coming to terms about opposing political ends. So in my version title, I'm going to give a paper, thanks to Dagmar, to a student conference on the pandemic and after the pandemic in, I guess, 8 days. And my working title, which I can't actually use for an international group and maybe can't use here, is From the Kitchen Table to the Kitchen Cabinet. Now, the Americans know what I'm talking about. Probably no one else in our group here know what I'm talking about, because the kitchen table, if everyone knows my work, is the starting point of my book, The Politics of Small Things. And the idea is that people, once in the good old bad days, the one place where they spoke freely was around the kitchen table. The kitchen cabinet is where I think the term first emerged with Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and it was his informal advisors. And it was the name for his informal advisors. And what I think is very important for Biden now is to develop a kitchen cabinet which includes people of broad range of opinions, and they come to some agreements about their conflicting opinions, Medicare for all versus updating Obamacare, but actually just as important as their agreement on content is actually the way they respect each other, and that they should figure out ways of using media to actually show their mutual respect and mutual regard. And that kind of expression of mutual respect and mutual regard amongst people who have differences, some differences, but are fundamentally in agreement that the situation we're in is intolerable, that kind of public expression using the media is very important. And I have some policy recommendations for the campaign in that regard, which I won't go into. But it's essentially showing the public kitchen cabinet. I'm done.
Thank you, Jeff. We are going to have a discussion we are going to start it in a second. I only wanted to say, because it connects what Jeff said with what Dagmar said about the as if philosophy, democracy as if democracy is a fiction. I wanted to say that, and I like Hans Weininger, I wanted to say that phrase as if served very frequently as a source of hope and bringing normal, believing we are living. This was this famous phrase, we have to behave as though we are living in a normal country and behave accordingly. So as it could be, the reason the phrase is ambivalent, and it could bring ambivalent meanings. It could take us to hope, and it could also indicate a possibility of hopelessness. Let's just see, whom do we have here? Jacek Kucharczyk, I see Jacek has not a comment, but a question. I mean, he would like to make a comment. Go ahead, Jacek.
Yes, thank you. Actually, two very brief comments. Mm-hmm. One is to Jeff Goldfarb. I mean, you just described the predicament of Polish opposition in the run-up to the elections, and in a broader terms. I mean, this is the crucial thing: liberals and leftists not talking together and attacking each other, which basically plays into the hands of Kaczynski. And I think it's fantastic when you talk about the US. I have a feeling you talk about Poland, and I hope you will give this presentation to the Polish audience soon, also not just to Slovak one. So this is the first thing. The second, to Jeff Isaac, on the irony of fighting for free elections in the US and in the context of postal vote. In Poland, the situation was almost exactly the reverse. The postal vote was thrown in the last minute as part of the anti-pandemic legislation, but it was completely taken out of the regular voting process. And the whole control, according to the same legislation, was given to government ministers, and the National Postal Service, whose CEO was fired the next day, and a politician was appointed to control the postal service. So the fight of the opposition, and actually it was effective, that was stopped. The elections were stopped. That was not about really postal vote as such, but about the fact that it was to be conducted in completely without any regular supervision and the bodies which are normally charged with supervising elections. So the presumption was that it will be basically controlled by the governing party, and that it will not be free and fair elections. So I think that's very interesting. Again, this parallels, but also differences between Polish politics. But once again, what's similar is an attempt to manipulate the electoral rules by the autocrats or populist autocrats in power. So just these two comments, but I mean, it was very revealing what you said, and informative for me about the US struggle for free elections. Thank you.
The elections in Poland are going to be, as far as I know, as I just heard about it, on June 28th. The exchange that you had, Jacek, with Paweł worried me, because I am very much for principles, and I think it's incredibly important to have the first. It would be great to have the president, the first, the president. The importance of the gay candidates is important. I also think that this gay candidate made so many problems, and it divides further the opposition to autocracy, that opposition should sit together and decide that they all support one. And I think Trzaskowski is the one. Elzbieta Korolczuk.
Okay, thank you. Two comments. One is concerning what just being said about the divisions and so on. While I also would like to have a unified opposition, I also think that the debates that we are having now are incredibly important about what are the roots of the crisis that we are now. Because if we don't understand the roots, how can we find a solution? And when, of course, neoliberalism has been overused probably in the debates, but there are also very precise definitions of what it is, proposed by Wendy Brown, Iva Ong, Eva Ilus, and others, that it's both economic doctrine, governance regime, and a cultural paradigm, which is based on economic rationality being the basis of organization of all spheres of human activity, including cultural production, practices of citizenship and intimacy, identity, emotions, and so on. So in that sense, this is a system in which profit maximization and efficiency becomes this kind of unquestioned value, which overrules cooperation, democratic politics, social solidarity, and pursuit of justice. So in that sense, I think it's really important to understand how could we move so quickly in the direction that we are all now in, because wherever I look, there are troubles, probably except for Sweden, although Sverigedemokraterna, the Swedish Democrats, also before the pandemics had 25% of popular support, which was the highest number for all political parties. So in that sense, I think it's quite important to understand what are the ideological differences between different groups that are struggling with each other now or fighting with each other now, but also how can we identify the problems that we are talking about. And the second issue, very shortly, I was wondering why we choose the term autocratic governments and do not use right-wing populist, because it seems that when we are talking about folksy dimensions, when we talk about polarization, when we talk about the sort of strong leader which doesn't really follow the rules, when we talk about the style of communication, when we talk about the expressive and emotional dimensions, sort of harnessing anger, creating divisions, scapegoating, I think that all those dimensions, all those factors actually fit the definition of right-wing populism, whether we would like to follow the one proposed by Laclau and others, or we would like to have this kind of more minimalistic definition proposed by Kasmuda and others, who talk about this kind of differentiation between us and them, elites and the people, and style of governance. So these are the two issues which sort of bother me quite a bit in our discussion. So I was wondering what you think about it.
May I answer?
I will ask Jeff and the other Jeff also to jump into the question of neoliberalism. When it comes to the last dimension that you were talking about, and the kind of I think they connected. Whether we want to call it autocracy, and that's not the same that authoritarianism, of course, the folksiness feeds and produces the results. The results in very many ways are the kind of regimes that we are dealing with. Jeff?
Okay, so as far as the label autocratic or right-wing populist, I'm agnostic. I actually am more concerned about the form than, or I think the form is distinctive and not the content.
That's what Laclau says.
And therefore, I'm kind of, I mean, theoretically, it's this could be a left-wing phenomena as well, and has been in history. So, but I don't have a significant skin in that game. As far as neoliberalism and root cause, on this, we disagree. I worry about the search for root causes, and I fear that when when we find root causes, what we do is undermine the capacity to act together with people with whom we have fundamental agreements about what the problems are and what the possible solutions would be. So, for example, in the United States right now, I'm on the left wing of the Democratic Party, but on the other hand, I appreciate what's actually happening now, that Biden and Clinton before him and Obama are all supposedly centrists in the name of some of my friends, progressive neoliberals. And now what we see is that actually so-called progressive neoliberals and progressives are actually quite capable of not only joining each other against Trump, but as the pandemic, the consequences of the pandemic unfold, they're quite capable of uniting around a very progressive agenda. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt wasn't a raving progressive, but the circumstances of his time made it so that he became the most arguably the most progressive president in the history of the United States. The situation is now configured that so-called neoliberals are going to be at the forefront of major progressive change if we defeat Trump. So the idea of finding that our first obligation is to get to the root cause, I think is an intellectual prejudice. I think it's politically disempowering. And I think it's a mistake of intellectuals. I think that the label disempowers us to address the problems of our times. Now, that said, I respect people who think differently. We have our scholarly debates. Some people see more precision, but it's scholarly precision in the term neoliberal. It's not popular precision. It's not understood more generally. And that difference between what happens among intellectuals and what happens in the public, I think needs to be paid attention to.
So I think it's a very important moment, and I don't want to end here. So I like to ask Jeff Isaac to join this conversation. And then I noticed that Andras Bozoki just wrote a comment, and maybe he can be brought in as well.
I fully agree with my friend Jeff. And I published a critique of Nancy Fraser 2 years ago in Public Seminar that was exactly on this topic. And what he said reminds me of Richard Rudy, but that's a name drop, not dropping comment. I would just say this. It's less important to describe the evil sometimes than it is to fight it. And I do think that the analysis is important in policy terms, but it has to be of secondary importance politically. And I think the term neoliberalism is often used as a term of derision to undermine the possibility of broad democratic left coalitions. I fully agree with Jeff.
I noticed that I skipped Pavel. Pavel still is going to ask his question, but I like to bring in Andras.
Hello. Yes, I just wanted to comment Elzbieta's remark on she suggested that instead of talking about authoritarianism or autocracy, let's talk about right-wing populism. And in the Hungarian context, talking about right-wing populism is a bit outdated. It goes back to 5 years ago, the major discourse around 2015, whether Orban is a populist or not, is he an elitist or not. I think we are beyond this. The question is not populism or elitism, but democracy or not. And I think too much talk about populism is misleading. We can lose the focus. And even moderate conservative right-wingers should join the anti-Orban coalition. So just because somebody is right-wing, still he or she can be Democrat. So let's not lose potential allies, I would say. Just like Jeff Isaac said that don't talk too much about neoliberals because we might lose potential allies. And indeed, there is a discussion in Hungary also about neoliberalism because in some ways the government is very nationalistic, very statist, But on the other hand, as for the foreign firms, they are pretty neoliberal and pretty social Darwinist. I would not call them neoliberal anymore, but social Darwinist and even post-fascist in some ways. But indeed, the Hungarian left, radical left, criticizes the center left as neoliberal, as followers of Clinton or Tony Blair, and therefore people who are not really trustworthy. And again, that undermines the success of a potential opposition coalition. But that's about the strategy. It is also a diagnosis that this is happening now in this desperate situation, trying to figure out a workable pro-democracy coalition. But there are some internal cleavages which might be a hindrance for us.
I was hoping that yesterday, at some point, we will be able to that we will be able perhaps to think more about what Gabor wrote in his piece, embourgeoisement, the kind of that creates a huge cleavages between those who 99% and the 1%, and that kind of tendency. We didn't succeed in that, but this session brings us a little bit back to it. Pavel, and maybe we will give Elzbieta a chance to reply.
Elzbieta should reply.
Yeah, but Pavel has a question, and if the question is related, I like to bring him first. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the question is related, but it's a quick question to Dagmar, Kusa. But of course, other participants can jump in and share their thoughts. Is it possible to save or to reclaim human rights discourse, or should we focus on developing new discourses instead? This is what seems to be interesting to me.
It has to be possible. It must be possible. There is no other way. I mean, if human rights discourse will be successfully hijacked, and that is slowly happening, you lose the definition of democracy. There is no democracy without a proper definition of human rights. It all stands on definitions. And if we allow for a small segment of the society to reinterpret and establish new meanings for those words within the society, and they tend to be successful. I mean, gender ideology is part of this. It's part of this hijacking.
And the problem, of course, here is that it's not just a kernel or a center of democracy, but also of liberal democracy.
Yeah.
And we're talking about it right now. This is a kernel of liberalism, in fact. Elzbieta.
Well, I wish. Yes, mm-hmm. I wish the strategy to tell people that those divisions doesn't matter and we have to fight the bigger enemy work. Let me tell you, it doesn't. It has been used by sort of dismissing the importance of ideological divisions and the ways in which we interpret the root causes of the situation. There has been quite a lot of people who have tried this in Poland for the last 5 years. And I must say it was quite, well, it is politically naive to say that once we say we should all join this fight, everybody will just join no matter political and ideological differences. So I guess you know it already in United States as well. And when I'm talking about root causes, I'm not thinking about that we should focus on establishing one hegemonic vision, whether it is neoliberalism or whether it is problems with democracy and so on. I'm thinking about using these explanations, and I think that this is what we do as intellectuals.
Using what? Using what?
Using our tools that we have as intellectuals and scholars to understand what are the motivations of people who still support right-wing populists or autocrats in countries such as Poland, right? If we don't understand it, I don't think we will be able to create an alternative and really fight this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel that we didn't really exhaust the situation. The discussion is, I mean, it can take us in different directions, but I do agree with Elzbieta that we've made those mistakes before. I just don't know how to address them today in the situation which seems somewhat similarly dire. So the problems with early feminist movement, 1980s feminist movement, was that the priority was to fight communism, and then we will think about gender issues later. And I think that was a problem and a mistake made, and it is a strategy, not just So there are other things to take into account. I don't know whether we have a break between this session and the next session. We can smoothly move to it and bring up to the surface, so we can all see and agree the most crucial things and threads which were brought, in the course of this last 2 days. So Jeff is running it. Okay. So it's your
so one thing is I'm looking forward to actually having more conversation with Elzbieta, with the other Elzbieta. And let's meet and chat. And I also just want to say with Dagmar, for everyone, that I think that our analysis is actually quite similar, but these are two sides of the same coin. And what we emphasize probably has more to do with our personal character and disposition than in our understanding of the times. And then I'm noticing that if Shireen wants to speak, she's been saying interesting things on the chat group. So I would love to have Shireen speak to the group, and then let's sort of slowly kind of mosey on from the discussion of this session to a kind of consideration of where we are and what we have to do next as a group.
I'm not going to take much time, but I did think that that we were speaking at cross purposes a little bit. And that in a way, in that conversation, we were modeling the throwing of labels actually also against the left, right? So that there's always this, it's a political question of how you set priorities and what compromises you're prepared to make. And it's always the left that is on the losing end of that.
No. Wait a second. I want to say that in the United States, it was going, when it seemed that Sanders was going to win, it was a mirror image of that. It was.
Yeah.
It was
I'm with both the Jeffs as far as pragmatic politics is concerned, and I do think you have to suspend some of your demands in order to form coalitions. But as a way of describing the very particular moment of capitalism that we are in, I do think the ways in which Elzbieta laid out neoliberalism is useful and has explanatory power. And so in some ways, I think, and this isn't the time because we've run out of time, but it deserves a full discussion. And I think that because it gets used as a political label in certain circles doesn't mean it's not still a very useful analytical insight. And I mean, like Elzbieta, I use Wendy Brown's political economy of neoliberalism quite extensively and usefully. And it takes, it enables you to see certain logics that are operating. And maybe you don't want to think in terms of logics. That's another question, right? But yeah, I mean, I just wanted to come in and just sort of position myself in relation to that debate. Because I think
I deeply respect that, and I think that the conversation is between these two positions is a very, very interesting one. And I don't think, personally, I don't think there's truth on either side. I think that the conversation is what's most interesting.
But Jeff, it's clearly one of those things that we need to bring back, we need to return to.
Yes.
You know, the way in which we can talk about redemocratization without paying a high price.
Yeah. I welcome further investigation on the part of the seminar. People who would like to take part in this discussion. I mean, I think that this is a good segue into what we do next. I mean, I think that what we have to do now is think about, okay, we've had a very nice conference. Not as many as we thought it would be. I think that it's really very, very significant series of discussions that we have had, and actually one major discussion. But there is the question, there's the political question of what is to be done, but then there's the seminar discussion about what is to be done. One way we can move on is actually just people, we should have a discussion now, but people should actually join the group and indicate in messages to the group that what topics we would like to explore. I mean, I have some of my favorites that have come out of this discussion, but we should have a general discussion. So let's say start with neoliberalism ? And the problems of our times, and anyone who wants to join that discussion should, and we should explore it dialogically. But I've spoken enough. I'd like to actually hear from other people about your responses to what we've done and what you think the topics are that we should explore more fully. Any questions that you have? Jeff, I see Jeff Isaac raising his finger, but let's again use the chat function after Jeff speaks.
Utku wanted earlier on, 3 minutes ago, to
just one or very short.
Then Jeff.
I mean, just for instance, this particular debate about this particular concept. I think one good thing about this group is that most of the, let's say, participants, or all of the participants, are theoretically involved, theoretically informed. And I think what people basically need right now is to just be given this discursive, let's say, platform, discursive ground, if you will. It will just bring like people of different opinions together. And in other words, I think this particular debate is especially useful so that it just gives us basically this task that we just can find this ground within this group, and then maybe present it to this larger audience. What if people of these different opinions can come up with this let's say this again discursive, let's say, message, discursive area, and we just basically produce it here and then present it again to the larger audience, and let's just set it as an agenda item, as a goal, not as a point that will let's say distinguish between people's positions within the group, but again like merging different ideas again to fight the authoritarian regime. Thank you.
Maria Bokur.
Yes. I think
Well,
Jeff Isaac wasn't.
Before Maria speaks, let me say that we're doing a number of things. We're recording this, and we're going to edit the recording, and we will make it available to this group, and then to to the larger public, maybe in a different form. We have the idea of following up this conference with a public conference. So we'll glean and from this group, what has been valuable, and figure out a way to create a public event, probably in June. And then lastly, which has always been on the agenda, is that we're going to
almost June. So it will be late June.
Late June, whatever. It could even be July. But then the papers that we've shared will be published in one way or another. It'll be published, for ourselves as working papers, and then we will work with you to develop the working papers into pieces that can be shared with a broader public. And the immediate vehicle for that is public seminar. So what Utku suggested is already part of our plan. He knows that, but I just want to remind all of us that this is our framework. Now, of course, we're open to other ideas for doing this. I'm very, very interested in, this is a new school-based operation, but collaborating with other institutions, kind of freeing the democracy seminar from its one institutional base to maybe a number of different institutions in different places in the world, even in different parts of the United States, is desirable. So that's how that's the plan that we have in place right now. Okay, now I'm going to be quiet.
No, you don't have to, but there is a list of people who want to add suggestions and have ideas for future discussion, and Maria Bukur was the first one.
Okay.
Very much. I'm gonna have to cut out soon, so I just want to say thank you. And also for themes, this discussion about being in a liminal space and in a transition from one thing to an unknown future that Pavel brought in. I keep thinking about that, and I think it seems to me like a very productive way to take both criticisms, but also the kind of hopeful manifestation of becoming more proactive and engaged. And so I think I'm enchanted places, and I just I hope that we keep working through that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. And Helena?
I think Jeff was also wanting to say something after Maria, and then.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't see it. Yeah.
I wanted to say something before Maria.
Okay, that's why I lost you. Yes.
I love Maria. I just wanted to thank Elzbieta K. and say that while I do disagree about the usefulness of the concept of neoliberalism, I agree that we're intellectuals and concepts are largely what we're about. And we're not political technologists. Mm-hmm. And so I think the question really has to do not with whether or not concepts are useful, but which concepts are useful and how explanatory concepts relate to prescriptive ones. Mm-hmm. And anyway, I won't go on about that except to say that I'm happy to be having this conversation. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So Helena, here you are.
Thank you. I actually want to pick up on what the three of you just said, because it was a bit of a revelation, Dagmar's piece, and especially your title, the as if part, because I think this is exactly where we are. We are in this kind of as if position where we're neglecting the actual factual things that are happening. And so I really appreciated what Pavel Knut said about the things that are happening on the ground with the LGBT community, reaching out to people who are probably not as sympathetic as they could be. So my suggestion for whatever form this could take in the future is kind of taking the as if into a what if, and using our intellectual capacity and our kind of practice-based capacity to think about possible future scenarios where we are using both our intellectual powers, but also the facts and our ability to, as activists or as analysts, to look at what the future holds for us, that we perhaps are seeing that is possible, but also that we would like to be shaped.
there is something also brewing right now in Poland, and some of our former alumni are involved in that, and it is feminist groups working on behalf of seniors in the time of pandemic, which is a very similar thing. I didn't even have a chance to talk about it with Pavel. Anybody else? I think one thing to talk about it is that the possibility, and we will contact you very soon about it, is the possible dates for that public event, to which I think we should bring up not just the things that we all agree about it, but also tensions, because they reflect the larger tensions, within, and I think that would be important for us to bring to the table. But I think if you, in the meantime, because we are tired, and if you in the meantime have any suggestions that you'd like, and things that you took from that meeting, that you like to bring and to make us aware of those thoughts, please do send it to us. Send it to Lara. I think it's important.
If everyone who wanted to speak at this point has spoken, then more or less on time, we will kind of end this mini conference. From my point of view, gloriously. I think that this was really, really an exciting event. As a sociologist of media, I'm really astounded that this has worked as well as it has. And I'm hopeful that that we will move forward and work together and get to know each other. And it's on the agenda of the Democracy Seminar that there will be a meetings in actual physical space. So, I hope there'll be a time when we can kind of not only do it this way, but do it as real human bodies. I'm going to call a formal end to this. Officially, the event is over. Great thanks for Lala for making this all possible. Pulling something like this off is incredibly difficult, and it's unimaginable without her kind of intelligence and ingenuity. And this wouldn't have existed if it weren't for her. And this is sort of your standard. I'm supposed to say this at this moment at the end of a conference. It's not an as if, it's the real thing. So really, thank you very much, Lala. Thanks to everyone, and we'll be in touch.